But over the last year or so, according to Labor Department data, 4 million Americans have quit their jobs every month since last June. So in other words, 10 straight months of more than 4 million Americans quitting their job. And the question is this really sort of unusual? Is it unprecedented? Is there something here going on? So let's talk about it with Ben Winck. He's the economics reporter for Insider. Ben, good of you to join us. What has been happening to cause this sort of great change over the past year?
Hey there, thanks for having me on. So the really interesting thing here is, we came out of the initial lockdowns with, first off, so much extra cash from stimulus and from pent up savings as we were locked down, staying at home and not really going out and spending. And all of a sudden, we unleashed this wave of spending, and businesses are struggling to really meet that with supply. And we've seen that, and you've probably heard about the supply chain issues that have been leading to a lot of inflation and really hitting businesses hard. But that also has to do with workers. They're just having a really hard time rehiring as fast as they need to sort of meet that wave of demand. And so we've come to call it, there are many terms for it. There's the Great Resignation, there's a labor shortage. And it's really a combination of it being really hard to hire, and then people quitting jobs either to just fully exit the labor force or to find a job elsewhere. The quits data that that I look at as an economy reporter, and that economists look at as well, that counts quits as both leaving to go to another job, but also just fully leaving the workforce. So it is a bit vague, but it's important to make that distinction.
And this high level of churn throughout the economy, it creates a record level of job openings. And I would imagine that also drives up wages.
Right, so that's what we've been seeing now in these monthly jobs reports, is that with labor force participation, or at least people who are in the workforce, being having a slower recovery than overall job growth, businesses are really clamoring to rehire and fighting over each other to get workers into their doors, right, to apply for their jobs. And that's we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, some businesses were saying, we'll give you a signing bonus. Businesses that really don't usually give signing bonuses, they'll give special gifts. I think a lot of fast food restaurants were offering iPhones and Apple products. But really, like you said, the number one thing we've been seeing for several months now is historically strong wage growth for the first time in decades.
So with all of this widespread quitting right now and job shakeups, it feels like to a lot of people, oh my God, we're in unprecedented times. And yet, as you've been reporting, actually, we've been through this sort of thing before. Explain.
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco had this really interesting study out last week. And I should preface this with, the data that we use to track the Great Resignation, right, quits data, that only goes back, at least the go-to measure that most economists look at, that only goes back to the year 2000, okay? Remember that, it's gonna be pretty important. What the San Francisco Fed said was, combining that data with some other jobs data that goes further back, what we're seeing right now isn't something that's brand new. It's not something we've never seen before. We actually had similarly high quit rates back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. The reason why it feels so weird right now is that our main benchmark for tracking quits and tracking this Great Resignation doesn't go that far back. It only goes to the year 2000. And so we haven't had a recovery over the past 20 years that's been this fast. You've seen jobs just flood the economy. You've seen businesses really struggling and rushing to rehire. And that pace has just outpaced how fast people are rejoining the workforce. You also have to consider, the economy is so much bigger than it was back when we had the last time we had such a fast jobs recovery. And there's still so many factors, like obviously the pandemic, holding people from looking for jobs and re-entering the workforce. Childcare expenses is a really big one for parents. And then some people are really just waiting to get the best offer they can get. They've been seeing wages climb for so long at a really healthy clip. And there are plenty of people who are just waiting on the sidelines to see, can I get a better starting salary if I just wait it out and negotiate a bit more?
So despite economic recovery, say 2009, 2010, what you're saying is that those were a little bit slower, and the stars also didn't align in terms of the pent-up demand or the stimulus checks, et cetera, that sort of comes together to create this sort of frenzy that we're feeling.
Exactly. The recovery after 2008, 2009 was really, really slow. I mean, the jobs recovery right now, if you're just looking at non-farm payrolls, right, the main jobs number, it's pretty much 3 times faster than the recovery after the Great Recession. Same deal with the recovery after the dot-com bubble burst in the early 2000s. That was also a pretty slow jobs recovery. So, this is the first one since we've been getting that quits data that we started collecting back in 2000. This is the first recovery to really show a rapid jobs rebound.
And does that rapid jobs rebound also then show up in terms of how high inflation seems to be reported now?
Right, so that's been the really interesting thing to watch now is, on one hand, wage growth has been stellar, but on the other hand, that's creating some concerns about a potential wage price spiral where people are getting paid more, so they spend more. That's more money going to businesses, and then they think they can raise prices because people have more money, and that could become a vicious cycle that just worsens inflation. But so far, the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has said he's not really concerned about that happening, that kind of vicious cycle emerging. We've seen productivity, which is really key in this kind of topic. Productivity has been growing at a pretty strong pace through the pandemic, and because of that, that's allowed for this kind of wage growth without those inflation worries. Now, if we see wage growth, continue to be really, really strong, while job growth is not as healthy, maybe it would be about time to start to worry about hitting the brakes on that. But for now, inflation is so strong that even though we have healthy wage growth, it's only just keeping pace with inflation. And in many people's cases, it's still not enough to beat how much prices are climbing.
Now, as far as job growth being very intense right now, and of course the job shakeup, the Great Resignation being very strong, whatever people want to call it, it's not like though it's going to last forever. And in fact, there's some indications that may not last through the end of this year.
Right. So, on one hand, you have to see that wage growth is so strong, and people are seeing that. And so that's probably one major factor that's driving all this resignation, all this quitting is people are seeing, oh, if I could go to this other job, or if I leave where I'm working right now, I can get paid way more. And there are so many job openings out there that it's not going to be that hard. And when Americans see other Americans quitting, especially like you mentioned earlier, 4 million a month for the past 10 months. When you see that many people quitting, you probably feel pretty good about doing that yourself, right? The odds that you can get another job, and not just that, but get a job that maybe has better conditions or better pay or both. People are feeling pretty confident in their ability to do that. Now, on the flip side, as jobs are filled and as job growth slows, just because we're nearing the end of the jobs recovery, we've already recovered 93% of the jobs that we lost. As the pace of that recovery slows, people might start to think, okay, it's not as easy to quit, and maybe I should be a bit more secure and rein in my expectations and stick with what I've got.
I wonder, Ben, how much the unique experience of the pandemic, people essentially being forced to experience having more time at home, essentially caused a realignment in people's sort of values on a wide scale. So that people thought, okay, before I was just sort of going to the office every day, but now I've experienced what it's like to be able to have a little more flexibility. I want to continue that flexibility. My job is telling me, no, you got to go back to the office. And no, I want to continue to have something that's more of a hybrid. How much is that sort of playing into all of this?
Yeah, so we see in some of the reports that, yes, we've seen the share of workers who are working remotely or telecommuting, that's gone down. And that makes sense, right? We're vaccinated now. Virus cases, while we start to see them, climb a bit higher, at least on the East Coast where I'm at, virus cases are still relatively low across the nation. And so, a lot of people are returning to offices. It's been going on for a few months, but there's still a pretty solid portion. I think it's around 10% still, who are working remotely. And I think it's fair to say that there are going to be people who are going to work remotely from here on out. Even once we are, fully vaxxed, boosted, and we can hopefully put this pandemic behind us. people are going to be working from home. And couple that with the worker power that we're seeing, right? Really strong wage growth, businesses really struggling to rehire and really being desperate to get their worker counts back to where they were. And a lot of people are saying, listen, if I can't work the way I want to work, and like you mentioned, I got used to these sorts of things during the pandemic, working from home, greater flexibility, that kind of thing. If they don't see that, a job that they're looking at, then they don't really have to take it because there's so many job openings throughout the country.
If somebody, Ben, is thinking about quitting their job or finding a new one, would the advice be to do it now because there are so many opportunities and because there's so much churn, as opposed to waiting 6 months or a year when maybe it's not quite as much of a frenzy?
I definitely do it now over waiting a year. 6 months out from now, who knows where we could be? There could be another virus variant wave. I'm crossing my fingers that doesn't happen, but I think right now, what the data is telling us is it's really, there have been very few times it's so easy to get in another job and to get a higher salary with that new job.
Any predictions, Ben, as far as the media market and where that goes? Do we have a future if we want to change jobs within the broadcast or digital space?
I think from what I've seen, I think the broadcast digital side, especially streaming, YouTube, that kind of thing. I think you're in a pretty good spot. As an economy reporter, I enjoy being in this sort of recovery phase because everyone cares about what's going on with the recovery, and people tend to tune in a little bit more. So I think all of us are in a very good spot.
Well, just to be clear, I am not about to resign my position with the Young Turks. I'm quite happy where I am, but we are growing. We're part of that market that is on fire. In any case, Ben Winck, he is an economics reporter for Insider. Ben, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.